to lead us in the Word.
Melissa, thank you much. And I'm especially glad to know, too, that Easter isn't dependent on the weather, because a couple of times we've had Easter outside and it snowed. So that could happen again, but it makes it kind of fun, doesn't it? It's a little kind of different thing going on there. To wade into our text today, I want to introduce you to somebody who maybe you already know of who this person is. You might recognize that's Alexei Navalny. Funeral was this past week on Friday. He died about 2 weeks ago, kind of suspiciously, in an Arctic prison in Russia. He became kind of well known in the West in 2020 when he almost died because he was poisoned. Turns out by the FSB, the Russian secret police. But Navalny apparently, sometime as an adult, became a follower of Jesus. And at his trial, the trial that he had, basically for being probably the most outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin within Russia, he got sentenced to 19 years in prison. But at his trial, he witnessed to his faith by saying this. He said, "I'm a believer now. This helps me much in my work because everything becomes much more simple. I hesitate less. There are fewer dilemmas in my life. It's because there is a book in which is actually more or less clearly written what one has to do. Of course, it's not always easy to follow this book, but actually, I try. This is why, as I've already said, it's easier for me than probably for many others to be engaged in politics." Now, I would guess that Alexei Navalny is someone who, even if he were not a believer, would be a very involved activist in the world, because I think it's just part of his DNA. But I cite his words there because I think he so exemplifies well how being a Christian does not mean withdraw from the rough and tumble of life in this world. And also because of his comment about how now as a believer, he says things are much simpler and more clear for him. And also how he found confidence even in the face of significant suffering. And in this, Alexei Navalny was not unlike the master who he was seeking to follow in his life, who himself faced a trial and conviction on very, very kind of trumped-up charges. And what I'd like us to consider today and look at in the Scriptures is a little bit of Jesus' trial before Pontius Pilate, particularly focusing on this conversation he and Pilate have about the kind of king that he is. See, I think we hear a lot in Scripture how Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and he's the Messiah king. But what does that really mean, Where is this kingdom? Does that have anything to do with people like us? Well, let's have at this portion of God's Word. John chapter 18, starting in verse 33. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you've done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "Ah, you are a king then," Pilate said. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" said Pilate. Well, all four Gospels bear some witness to this trial of Jesus before Pontius Pilate. John says by far the most extensive. You have about 30 verses in both chapters 18 and 19 that cover this. And he has it's 7 kind of distinct scenes here. He starts out, he's outside with Jesus' accusers, and he goes inside his palace to talk to Jesus, and he goes out and in again. See, the reason why he has to go outside is because the people accusing him, they wouldn't come in. because if they came in and went into a Gentile's home, they would have been ceremonially unclean to celebrate the Passover. And even if you want to have Jesus killed, you got to keep your hands clean while doing it, right? So they didn't want to go in. We learn from secular sources that Pilate was appointed to be the governor of Judea in the year AD 26 by the Roman Emperor Tiberius. And if you think about that role that he has as governor of this region, he has to be a guy who's a really good and really practical administrator, right? And so his orientation when Jesus is brought before him is basically, is this guy a problem that I need to solve, right? Is this guy a problem that I need to solve, to be concerned about? And I think that's the way a lot of people look at Jesus today. Does this guy have anything to do with me? Does he have any impact on my role of trying to maintain order in my corner of my world? Does he have any significant impact on my life at all? And at this point, at least, Pilate seems to conclude that not really, not really. At the end of the scene, he seems to regard Jesus as some kind of a flaky dreamer, but really somebody who's no threat to Rome. He does, of course, end up ordering Jesus' execution, but it's not really because he sees Jesus himself as really a threat, but because the people accusing him, the Jews do, and he has to live with those people, and so he kind of gives in to their wishes. And the reason why Pilate doesn't see Jesus as much of a concern, and why I think a lot of people today don't see Jesus as very relevant to life, and why a lot of even Christians, the main lens through which they look at Jesus as, okay, he's the one who died so my sins could be forgiven and I could go to heaven after I die, right? I think the reason for all this is because they, and maybe we don't have the same understanding of a king and a kingdom that Jesus does. When Pilate asked Jesus this, are you the king of the Jews? What he wants to know is, are you a king like I am? Are you the ruler of a realm that's ruled by force, by wealth, by fiat? Do the people of your kingdom, do they abide by your rules and your wishes? Because if they don't, right? That's what Pilate thinks of as a kingdom. And Jesus answers him this way: my kingdom is not of this world. And I think it's very unfortunate that a lot of people hear that statement and run with that statement as if Jesus is saying that his kingdom really doesn't have anything to do with life, here in this earth, right? Doesn't have anything to do with that. For non-believers, that Jesus has this abstract or idealistic kind of vision here. It's about the world as it should be, but not as it really is. And for some believers, they take Jesus as saying, well, his kingdom, it's all about heaven, and which is far, far away from anything to do with life here, right? But the sense in which not of this world is used here is that his kingdom doesn't operate in the ways of the kingdoms of this world. And hence that explanation, if it were, my servants would fight, because that's how kingdoms of this world operate, right? My servants would fight. And you'd think that if they're fighting and miracle-working Jesus is leading them, that they'd have a good fight, wouldn't they? They'd really kick butt there, wouldn't they? Especially considering that the people they're fighting against are just, they're a bunch of theology professor types and priests, and these guys are rough, tough fishermen. They think they do really well in that fight. F.F. Bruce, a New Testament scholar, he translates Jesus' words here this way. He says, "My kingdom does not proceed from this world, and in the end, it proceeds from another place." In other words, it comes from a different set of rules and ways and values. And Jesus, he clarifies this further in the next line. When he says, "For this reason I was born, I came into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of the truth listens to me." So his kingdom's about truth, to which Pilate very famously and very cynically then says, well, what is truth, right? See, for Pilate, truth is something really abstract that people like philosophers like to philosophize about, Or I think of, maybe most of you aren't old enough to remember this, but the old Superman show. It said the Superman is one who stands for truth and justice and the American way. But what does that really mean? What's that really mean? And remember, Pilate, he's in the executive branch of Roman government. And his role is to enforce Roman law. Now, Roman law is about many things, but one thing it's not about eternal philosophical truth. Pilate understands that discussing truth is not really his business. And so this cynical, what is truth, he's really saying, look, none of this is relevant to the charges being brought against this guy. He's no threat to Rome. Jesus, though, isn't talking about something abstract here. The truth he's talking about here, friends, are the true ways of the one true God. It's truth that can be known, truth that can be lived. Earlier in his ministry, Jesus said this. He said, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Actually, the line before it's significant too. He says, if you obey my word, you're my disciples indeed, and then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. In other words, this is a truth that can be known, right? Truth that sets us free. Free from what? Well, free from things like fear, anxiety, selfishness, addiction, and all manner of things that are kind of dead-end ways of living. Living in the ways of God's truth frees us from stuff like these. That's pretty practical, right? And then the night before this encounter with Pilate, probably actually it's even earlier the night of his encounter with Pilate, Jesus is just with his disciples, and he says this. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. In other words, you want to know how to live in the true ways of God's kingdom? The ways of real life? Well, look at me. Follow me. Because I am the truth. I embody the truth. God's true ways, God's priorities, God's values. And what is so ironic here, friends, is that the Jews' whole purpose, the reason why God revealed himself to them in the first place, was so that they could be witnesses to the world, in word and in deed, to the truth of God. To God's justice, to God's mercy, to God's love. And not only did they drop the ball on that, but here they're opposing the Messiah, King, but they also totally cave to Pilate's kingdom. Because at the end of this, Pilate, still wanting to release Jesus, he says, shall I crucify your king? You remember what they say? They say, we have no king but God. No, not no king but God. They say, we have no king but Caesar. Well, some takeaways here. First thing with this, I just want us to be crystal clear that the kingdom over which Jesus rules as king is not some abstraction, it's not an ideal, and it's not something we can only experience sometime after we die. Now, like any other kingdom, we're talking here about a real realm in the real world where the rule, the ways, the priorities of a king can be lived into and lived by real people like us. One commentator puts it this way. He says that Jesus' disciples, what they were really looking for was a kingdom without a cross. In other words, they wanted to see God's rule, but not the suffering stuff, right? He says, as opposed to them, a lot of people today, a lot of Christians today, what they really want is a cross without a kingdom. Or as this scholar puts it, he says, what people want is some abstract atonement in Jesus' death that has nothing to do with this world except to provide a means to escape it. Now, friends, let me be clear. I really believe the person who said that, the scholar who said that, also really believes that Jesus was in history raised from the dead. And that someday he promises to do the same by the same power of God, to raise from the dead his followers in history, to do that, right? But Jesus' kingdom, friends, is a reality to be lived now. It's about living the truth about God's ways and making them our ways now, in this life, in this world, right? I think another takeaway, though, would be this, that that while Jesus' kingdom is indeed relevant to life in this world, it's about living in this world differently from the ways of other kings and other kingdoms. In other words, it's not about things like exerting your power and getting your way, or as Jesus says in the passage, fighting back. Which, by the way, does not mean that in principle, his kingdom excludes these things. Jesus did all those things at one time or another, right? But it's not the priority the way it is in other kingdoms. The priority is more about ways like humility, forgiveness, doing what's kind and what's right and not just what's expedient. Ways that Pilate and people who only live in his kind of kingdoms just don't really get at all. Now, for some people like Alexei Navalny, living in this kingdom does mean standing up to some of the powerful kings of this world and even suffering for it. And I think for almost all believers sometimes, and for some, especially those who teach and who lead a lot more often, living in the kingdom that, as Jesus says, is about truth means standing up in opposition to some of the kingdoms of this world that are not about the truth. But it's not just standing up for the right things. It's also doing so in the right ways and for the right reasons. For example, a lot of Christians will emphasize how, we need to in our day really stand for sexual purity and against sexual immorality. And that is true, we do. But you know what? If we're going to do that, we probably need to be thinking and talking and standing about 20 times more against heterosexual immorality than we do the LGBTQ stuff because, friends, especially in the church, that's the kind of immorality that's probably 20 times more prevalent, right? Stand for the right things in the right way. And also, with the right heart, the right motivation. It's not just because sexual morality and those who practice it, they're just disgusting people. No, it's not that. It's because we believe that purity is a beautiful thing. And immorality hurts people, and we love people. We want to see people flourish. Or how about on the other side of the spectrum? Living in God's kingdom means standing against racism. But it doesn't mean mocking people who have racist attitudes and tell racist jokes. And we're going to mock them because, they're just stupid. They're just uncultured. No. It's not just because it's cool in our circles to be against racism. No, it's because we deeply believe that every person has been created in the image of God, right? It's fearfully, wonderfully made. But let me leave you, instead of calling us to go do some protest against Putin or go on a pro-life or anti-racism rally or something like that. Let me leave us with a more everyday call to action with respect to living out God's kingdom ways. What I want to encourage each of us to do is sometime between now and next Sunday, commit yourself to just one action, one thing that that would be new for you, or that you probably wouldn't be thinking about if you weren't here listening to this today. But one concrete action that aligns you more squarely with the ways of the kingdom where Jesus is king. And I'm talking about things that are really, really simple, friends, and really just daily things. Like, for example, committing yourself to serve somebody that you're not obligated to serve. Somebody's not really in your world. Something outside your job description, right? Or maybe it'd be something like this. Maybe you add to the list of people that you're praying for this week, specifically praying for somebody that you don't like, right? Although if you do that, what you might find is by the end of the week, you dislike them less. That'd be a tragedy, wouldn't it? Oh. Or maybe, how about this one? This is probably mine. And that would be that this week, when you say or you do something that hurts somebody near you, okay? And again, I say this for me because there won't be a week that goes by that I don't do that, okay? When you do that, instead of trying to, explain and justify why you said, why you did what you did, well, because they hurt me first, right? Instead of that, you just apologize, You can think of your own thing like this too. There's dozens, there's hundreds of very simple, understandable, concrete ways that you can choose to live a kingdom of heaven life in your everyday world. And this is the sense in which I take that comment by Alexei Navalny from his trial about how since becoming a follower of Jesus, that his life is just much simpler and clearer. Now, there are plenty of things that aren't super simple and aren't clear, right? I was thinking about one a couple of weeks ago when someone that I knew from years ago was talking to me, and the dilemma for me was, okay, how do I witness to my pro-life convictions with this person who is not pro-life and is telling me about an abortion that she had, right? That's not easy. It's not easy to think about, how do I come alongside, an adult child of mine who's struggling, who's not really walking with the Lord so much, and how do I do that? Or how do we solve the problem of the Penguins power play? There's a tough one, right? That's people making boku bucks trying to do that, Again, not everything is simple and clear, but friends, in terms of attitudes, character traits to demonstrate, in terms of our approach to God, our approach to other people, it's really not hard to see God's true ways as we look to the King who embodies those ways, right? Jesus. And if you do think more that, there's something about Pilate's kind of kingdom that really is preferable, power, throwing your weight around so you can get your way. That seems preferable. If you really think like that, I want to encourage you, read this whole part of John's Gospel, the whole 7 scenes, right? And ask yourself this. Ask yourself, who is the secure, confident one here, and who's the one who's really in charge of things? Pilate, he's got all the power of Rome at his disposal, and yet, here he is, he's running around, he's going outside, he's saying, oh, you're accusing Jesus? Jesus, they're saying this about you. Oh, will you say this? Well, he said this. Is he really a problem? I don't see him as a problem. Oh, Jesus, here's why they say you're a problem. I mean, he's definitely, following the ways of his kingdom, and as he does that, he ends up having Jesus executed because he gives in to these people, even though he knows they're wrong, because he's afraid they're going to tattle about him to his boss. How pathetic is that? Or what about Jesus' accusers? They're just controlled by their jealousy and their anger. The only calm one here is Jesus. Now, he had his moments before this in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was having to wrestle with the reality that his coronation was soon coming and it was going to take place on a Roman cross. But here, as he's really in the thick of everything, Jesus accepts, he embraces that at the heart of the kingdom of God's true ways, the kingdom over which he himself is king, at the heart of it there really is a cross. See, Pilate's kingdom, friends, and all the other kingdoms of this world, they really don't have much to say to us about realities like suffering and death. They don't. Except to say you want to avoid these at all costs, right? But in God's kingdom, though, there's no end run around these at all. What there is, though, is a king who identifies with us in suffering and even in death, and who leads us through them. And these, friends, are some of the realities that we're witnessing to when we come to this table. So let's prepare.